one problem that this causes is when people measure droplet size, you could do it with a phase Doppler particle analyzer that has two intersecting laser beams. And so you can focus it. So you could focus very accurately right on that number 2, and you can measure the droplet size there. And so you're not actually measuring the size of the nozzles on the outside of the spray plume. But this is where the big droplets are. So if you only measure it here, you get a falsely low number. Well, we might take a nozzle and say that it makes a 30 micron droplet because we've measured it down here after this effect is all over. But if you measure it improperly, you might think it had a 15 micron droplet because you measure it close in here before all this coalescence has taken effect, and you measure it in the middle of the spray plume where only the smallest droplets exist. So you could find a 10 micron droplet in a shower head. If you looked enough, you'd find it. But if you really look at the full spray plume, and the way we analyze droplet sizes, we scan through the spray plume close enough in, or rather far enough out, so that the coalescence effect has already occurred. This just shows droplet size downstream of the orifice, and you can see for the swirl jet nozzle, it's growing quickly until it gets about 10 inches away. For the impaction pin nozzle, it's growing slowly, and it stops growing at about 6 inches away. Mixing and evaporation are also very important. If you have tight spray plumes, you have a lot of air in between, so there's no evaporation. There's only evaporation occurring off of the edge of the spray plume. And any excess vapor in here has to migrate out to the drier area. That takes a long time to occur. So again, mixing is a really critical thing. Some people think that there could be coalescence here, but that doesn't really happen because all these droplets are traveling at the same speed. By the time you get about a foot downstream of the nozzle orifice, there's really very little coalescence. Even if you spray two nozzles directly at each other, they're still, the droplets are dispersed enough that the odds of them hitting are very low. So we don't worry too much about coalescence downstream of the fog nozzles, except where the droplets might collect on a strut or a wall or something like that. But the droplets don't continue to grow as they move downstream. They actually appear to continue to grow because the little ones are evaporating and disappearing. So if you keep measuring droplet size downstream, you could think that coalescence was occurring, but really all that's happening is the smaller droplets are being removed from the population, and the larger ones are getting smaller as they go. One important aspect of inlet fogging, particularly if you're fogging in the filter house up here, you want to avoid temperature deformations at the compressor inlet. So you don't want it to be cold here and warm here. So to do that, you have to have even fogging upstream. But it turns out you need to have uneven fogging because the airflow is uneven. So you get a lot more airflow in the middle of the duct there. The orange is showing higher velocity and lower velocity on the edges. So we want to have more nozzles in here and fewer nozzles out here. We did a lot of CFD analysis early on, but we don't typically do them on a per project basis anymore because we've kind of learned from what we did before. So the major design considerations for a fog system, you want to have you want to start with small droplets as the most critical factor. Avoid agglomeration, don't put nozzles too close together. Get good mixing, so take into account the uneven airflow. You want to avoid foreign object damage by having nozzles that could come loose or parts of nozzles that could come loose. For evaporative cooling and for situations where you're concerned about droplets entering the compressor, you want to have maximum residence time so that nozzles are located as far upstream as possible. Although today probably most OEMs are pretty comfortable with over-fogging or high fogging or wet compression. We build for Alstom. Siemens does their wet compression stuff. We make wet compression for Pratt & Whitney. We've done some for MHI in the past. So GE is kind of the last holdout on the wet compression front. But again, we have 20 years experience spraying about 0.5% water into the inlet of 78 gas turbine. At Watson Cogen, I believe someone is from Watson Cogen today. There he is. So controls accuracy is important too. GE used to have this spec that you wanted to have not more than 99% humidity or 98% humidity at the inlet here, so you would be assured of not having excess water. We're controlling by measuring the ambient weather conditions and calculating how much water needs to go into that air mass flow to reach the target temperature. And we do that because it's hard to get sensors that are accurate in the close to the turbine inlet. They're adversely affected by the high airflow, particularly humidity sensors. They can get wet from liquid water that's in the vicinity, and so they read too high, etc. So that's how we do it. We calculate how much water is needed, and we inject that much water. Another real important aspect of fogging is drains, dams, and gutters. So I've shown some drain points here. Typically we'll have a channel on the floor here to collect water that's flowing on the floor and drain it away. The silencer will collect some water on it. That usually will fall to the floor here, so we drain it away again there. And usually there's some water on the back wall here. We'll often have a channel that goes around the compressor, so any water flowing down this wall gets directed to the drain in the floor. And on some of the some GE gas turbines, the distance from the floor here to the inlet is quite short, and the velocity is very high, so you can actually suction water up off of the floor. In that case, we use a little false floor there to direct water down the drain. And then finally, viewing windows for visually monitoring the fogging. That's something we recommend on all installations. You just want to be able to see if something happened and there's damaged nozzles in there that are spraying improperly. The system does has an onboard computer that's monitoring the water flow, so if something broke in here or a nozzle orifice opened up, we would know that and alarm and shut down. That's a typical high pressure pump skid. So these are, you can't see them, but behind that belt guard there is a CAT ceramic plunger, high pressure pump, stainless steel head. That's kind of the standard for inlet fogging. More recently, Danfoss company has introduced an all stainless steel pump that has no seals and no oil in it. It's actually lubricated by water. So we're doing some work with those now also. And then one problem we notice with CAT pumps is when you have deman water, the high pressure seals wear out quickly because the deman water is a poor lubricant. It actually washes the lubricant out of the seals. So CAT pump developed a thing they call a seal flush system that allows you to operate 6,000 to 8,000 hours between changing of seals to reduce the maintenance requirement. And that's a typical installation. That's a filter on the skid. We always have a submicron filter on the skid. Some water treatment systems, if you have twin bed deionization instead of RO, for example, and you're pumping river water, there can be colloidal silica in the water that's not removed by the purification system. It's not dissolved, it's colloidal particles, but it can actually damage the fog nozzle, so we always filter on the skid to make sure that that doesn't occur. Inlet fogging and NOx is a wonderfully complicated chart. Fogging does reduce NOx, typically by about 10 to 20%. And it's because the humidity of the working fluid is raised so that there's fewer hot spots in the combustor and there's less transmission of heat by infrared.